lived in Scranton all my life, and I've seen the two fallen flags, the Erie, Lackawanna, and the D&H, both disappear and become part of Conrail. And, you know, at one point there was almost no railroading in this area. I basically got into model railroading as an extension of a basic love for trains. I got into trains when I was a kid. As far as the hobby end of it, I had my grandfather, my Grandpa Perry on my mother's side would do a platform at Christmas time, and that's how I got into that, with the platform underneath the tree. And I had another uncle on my dad's side who used to put an ad in the paper at Christmas time and repair trains for people. So those are the two guys that got me into doing this. And basically I've always had a fascination with trains, especially steam locomotives, because they're so huge and powerful pieces of machinery. Where we're doing this little interview here is actually my shop. I have two projects sitting here on my workbench that I'm working on. One is the new controller for my turntable, which I have a test set up here on my bench, and the hardware is done. I'm working on the program to actually make it work. And the other thing I have is I've been installing lights and headlights and stoplights into my trolleys. So while the two trolleys that are on the platform are sporting their holiday decoration shell, the two shells that are normally on the platform in regular time are in here, and I'm in the process of installing lights and LEDs into these shells so that the trolleys will always have lights and headlights and stoplights. I'm in HO, which is relatively small, and it has a tendency to be delicate. And a little interesting backstory to that is, when I was a kid, I started in Lionel's, and my dad's brother, my Uncle Mike, when his first son came along, he had HOs that he had bought for underneath the Christmas tree, and the kid was basically able to pick them up and throw them around the room. So he made the suggestion of swapping his O gauge, or my O gauge, for his HOs. And that's how I ended up with my first HO train, but I originally started in O gauge. And what's neat about the hobby is it presents a lot of different aspects, from an artistic end that the young lady behind the camera here would probably be interested in, is making the scenery and setting the buildings together and doing what's called weathering to make the buildings look not like they're a piece of plastic that just came out of the box. And there's the electrical end, where all of the electronics and everything that actually makes the platform work. And then there's the laying a track. There's, some guys get into laying track just like the real railroads would, where you buy rail, you buy ties, you lay the ties down, glue the ties down, and you take little railroad spikes and you spike the rails into the ties. I don't do that. I'm not that fanatical. I buy my track ready-made and use that. There's not too many local hobby shops that stock that much stuff. In the past few years, I've actually used eBay quite a bit, because there's a lot of online hobby shops that are on eBay. Plus, there's people, every once in a while, you'll get lucky and find somebody who's selling off a layout from a father or a grandfather who passed away, and they really don't know what they've got, and they sell them really dirt cheap. And the 765 that I have on my layout is a perfect example of that. After we took the excursion in 2015, I spotted a model of the 765 on eBay at an auction, and if I were to buy it from Bachman, the manufacturer, brand new, it would cost about $300 or $400 today. I'm retired. I was an electrical engineer at Lockheed Martin. That was my full-time job up until a year and a half ago. And when I retired, I went back to one of my favorite haunts, Steamtown, and I'm now a volunteer at Steamtown. Be on a train crew, learning all the ins and outs of railroading and how the railroads work, and hopefully someday maybe get into the cab. And I have had the opportunity, not this year because the museum has been closed with the pandemic, but when I started in the summer of 2019, I actually had the opportunity, when we were short-staffed for the crew, I actually got to be firemen on the 514 diesel and the 664 diesel. So what we have here is, this is an industrial park. There's a couple of different industries. There's a barrel manufacturing plant. We have a UPS, lumber yard, and a casket company that takes care of making caskets. And one of the little scenes that I have here is we actually have tree trimmers trimming a tree in the neighborhood. On this end of the layout here, we have a full-fledged farm. We have the farmer out in the field cutting the hay. We have cows, we have sheep, there's pigs and chickens in the background. The farmer has a garden and a stand where he sells his vegetables. As we move up the base of the T, one of the first things we come to after we get past the farm and the industrial park is the amusement park in the background. Most of the rides in the amusement park actually operate. And when we get going in the operating session, you'll see some of that happening. The train runs, the monorail moves. The only one that doesn't work yet, and it is supposed to, is the roller coaster. Gravity has a little bit of an issue with it. I'm still working out the bugs on that one. Next to that, we have a train wreck. One of the Erie Lackawanna's trains went off the track, and we have the wreckers out there putting it back on the track and getting the rails back together. One of the things I model on this layout are two fallen flags from the area, the Erie Lackawanna and the D&H. I have two separate rail yards, but they are interconnected like the rail yards used to be years ago down in Central City in Scranton. One of the things I put out for Christmas is we have a Christmas parade. We have Santa, we have two bands. The larger band is actually in my old high school colors. And we have guest of honor, we have the Monkeys in the Monkey Mobile. And we also have Channel 16 broadcasting it live with Marisa Burke and Scott doing their commentary of the parade as it goes by. This is the downtown district of the platform. We have a trolley system with two trolleys, and it's what is called a point-to-point railroad, where the two trolleys will go to either ends of the platform, which you'll see later when we start operating. And they stop for 1 minute, reverse direction, come back, and then there's two tracks here in the Central City where they actually pass each other. Another scene that we have is a building on fire, and it actually burns and lights up. You'll see that as we get going. This movie theater right in the front here, the Lowe's, actually has a chase light marquee that was custom built a few years ago. In the back is my E&L Erie Lackawanna rail yard, which has a servicing facility. There's a double stack container yard, which you can see there. Over on the right side is my roundhouse with a 6-stall roundhouse and some garden tracks. One of the things I'm in the process of doing right now is I'm working on a new controller because the turntable doesn't index as well as it used to. Another feature of the downtown is we actually have the Scranton Electric City sign. And when we fire everything up and I do the night scene, you'll be able to see that operating. And at the station, we have a model of the 765, which I had the pleasure of riding an excursion back in 2015 from Steamtown in Scranton up to the Delaware Water Gap and back. So I actually modeled it, and you'll see that operating. That is actually one of the two digital command control locomotives that I have on the layout that actually has sound effects, bells, whistles, and chuff. So again, you'll hear that operating when we go. We have a wedding scene in the downtown at our local cathedral. And in conjunction with the visit from the American Freedom Train, we have a band and a few displays set up next to the American Freedom Train. The American Freedom Train is the second digital command control locomotive that I have, and this one's a little bit different. It's made by a company called Broadway Limited, and I actually have control over some of the sound effects with that one, where the 765 I don't have that. This is my control panel, and once we get into the operating session, you will see different indicator lights that tell me which way switches that are on the layout are thrown, so that I know how I'm routing a particular train as they're running, and it basically gives me control of everything that's going on. This section here, we're getting into where I have the D&H section with the D&H yard, and where they would also pass. It's kind of modeled a little bit after the arrangement downtown. The railroad bridge you see in about the middle of the platform is actually representative of Bridge 60 downtown at Steamtown, and the D&H years ago used to pass underneath Bridge 60. That's now the DL. It's a single track short line now in Scranton. All the way in the back here, above the waterfall, is a small lake. There are water skiers on the lake and swimmers on the beach. And down here in what would probably be the Lackawanna River, are some fishermen actually fishing, and there's a couple of campers out the back end there. But this is the D&H yard and the D&H maintenance facility. There's actually an overhead crane and everything, and you'll see when I do the night scene, this all lights up and you can look inside of the shop facilities. Here we have a D&H passenger. We also have the Hogwarts Express as a special on the D&H mains. And in the background on the road, we have the local power company, you could call it BP&L, replacing a power pole and re-rigging all of the wiring. In the back, we have a baseball field with the baseball players, and one team actually happens to be in the Phillies colors, red and white. The other one are actually in blue colors, which probably is the Mets. All the way in the back right corner, we have the airport. It's not exactly modeled after the Avoca Airport, but the 3 DC-9 model jets that are on the tarmac are representative of Eastern Airlines, which used to fly into Avoca, Allegheny Airlines, and Southern Air. And the reason there's a Southern Air is my father years ago used to go away with the Navy, and a couple of times they flew out of the airport on a charter service called Southern Air. And the one year they went on the return trip, the airlines were giving all the guys models of the DC-9s, and his buddies knew that I was at a model railroad, so they gave him extra kits. So that's where I got the 3 DC-9s from. And hanging over the platform is the Goodyear Blimp, which many years ago came to the Avoca Airport for the races up at Pocono Raceway, and that actually has an actual operating sign on it like the Goodyear Blimp does. In this corner here, we have a coal mine, which someday I may get to the point of having it operate. The track going into the mine is actually set up that it could actually operate the trains. And we have a Kentucky Fried Chicken, and that's pretty much the tour. So we're going to start bringing the platform to life. As you can see, we have quite a few street lights. Some of them are regular incandescents, some of them are LEDs. We have a Starbucks, which is from a company called Maynard's, and it's got quite a few. There's actually 36 LEDs in that particular model. And you can see the Lowe's movie theater lit up and the chase lights working. You can see the fire burning in the building that's on fire. And in the back you have the Scranton Electric City sign. And over there we have the bands. The band that's playing for the Freedom Train. And if you look at the traffic lights are actually working. I don't know if you want to hang on one for let it sequence through. but that actually does the red, yellow, green sequencing. And you can actually see some of the indicators on my on the panel showing the directions of the switches. And the baseball field all the way in the middle there, that's lit up for a night game. And you can see the way that the D&H engine house lights up. What I do is get the diesels off, and what there is embedded in the track is an uncoupler. We're going to pull the diesels, pull the train forward, then back up into the uncoupler to get the cars to cut loose. Okay, the cars are now loose. We're going to pull up the diesels and get the diesels out of the way. We have to switch them over to another track. They're going to come down between the 765 and the train. Once it's clear and it's not following the switches, then we'll bring the 765 out. 765 is one of the two digital command control locomotives that I have. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the sound effects, the whistles and the bells. Because this layout is DC and not DCC, I do not have control over the sound effects on that locomotive. It's basically the speed of the locomotive that sets the sound effects. If I speed it up a little bit, you basically lose the bell, which is basically a warning for anyone standing around that the locomotive is moving. At this point, the 765 is on the same track as the train. The train itself, I'm setting the switches now so that it can back into the train. Signal that it's reversing, and you can hear the bell operating as it works in reverse. I have to continue pushing the train backwards until I clear the uncoupler. Now we'll go forward, and you'll hear the engine signal. And the chuff on the locomotive changes with the speed of the locomotive. Basically, I've always had a fascination with trains, especially steam locomotives.